Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today I want to take a look at the comparison between Linux and Android on the Anbernic RG353V. If you've been following this channel at all, you'll know that my operating system of choice is Android, full stop. The features, no limits, cloud saving, Daijisho, and expansive emulator community just makes it the best place to play games, in my opinion. So you might be wondering why I would want to torture myself on the Linux side with this video. Well, with my Anbernic RG35XX arriving soon, I thought it would be best to get back up to speed with what that side can do and share my comparisons. The RG353V being the perfect device to do it with, as it dual boots both operating systems. On the Linux side, I'll be running ArcOS with the Switch theme, and on the Android side, I'll be running stock Android with Daijisho Frontend and the Play Store installed. Everything's been customized to how I like it. None of these tests are scientific in any way, more looking at it from a lens of someone who primarily uses Android and is curious about Linux and has time on his hands. So with all that being said, let's do some fun tests and myth busting. Let's start with the out-of-the-box experience, and well, it doesn't really exist for either of them straight from the manufacturer. For Linux, I had to install ArcOS, which was flashing an SD card and putting it on the device. All the emulators are set up with ArcOS hotkeys, and not much else I need to do besides add ROMs and BIOS files. For Android, Anbernic has each emulator set up already in a similar fashion, albeit most are out of date, so you can get away with having a similar experience. But for an actually good experience, you're going to be wiping them all, reinstalling them, mapping each emulator, configuring settings, and putting Daijisho on as a front end. Take a look at my RG405M setup video for what that all looks like. I've gotten extremely good at this and can pretty much do it all in an hour or two, but not everyone can. A major benefit there is I can set up everything how I want it, whereas with the Linux install, I have to refer to their hotkeys page, their setup and settings, everything, and then change them as I go to how I usually want them. It takes me just as much time reconfiguring all that as it would have taken me to just set up everything from the beginning. But for the average user, the custom firmware Linux experience is definitely easier, and the winner here. How easy is it to add new games to each? Well, with Android, the sky's the limit. Use the browser to legally download your ROMs, or with the Play Store, you can use a File Explorer app to wirelessly transfer games over your local network. Removing your SD card and connecting it to a PC is the archaic last way that just shouldn't even be used anymore. For Linux, it's a bit more cumbersome. First, you have to consistently enable remote services every reboot, but thankfully ArcOS has a web browser option to add and remove ROMs. If I had to SSH into this thing, I was ready to just cancel this project altogether. But the web browser option helped quite a bit. It's actually really useful, and I'm glad it exists. However, Android is the clear winner here for the multitude of options it has. Now let's talk about front-end experience, and this will change for each custom firmware out there, but for this, it's Emulation Station versus Daijisho. The first thing I did after setting up Linux was connect to Wi-Fi, and I thought I was transported back to 20 years ago. I was greeted with a Windows 95 looking UI, and the keyboard was special. Maybe this is what people refer to when they talk about bloat in Android. Can't have bloat if there's barely a GUI. Pretending I'm the hacker from Swordfish jokes aside, it was pretty easy to navigate around to do things I needed to do, just not pretty. I also found myself trying to use the touchscreen to do things quite a bit, and getting frustrated I couldn't. But with Android and Daijisho, that experience is a lot more modern, and more 2023-ish. That brings me to my next section. Box art and nice overall prettiness, because I can't think of a better word. To get box art on both devices is similar, through the settings with Linux or just clicking Sync in Daijisho. Daijisho can do it automatically through Sync, whereas Linux does not and involves going to the menu to scrape. Android, and more specifically Daijisho, is the clear winner here. Now for the fun part, some tests. For Bootup Time, as in completely shut off to front-end showing, I clocked the Linux side at 20.32 seconds. On the Android side, it was roughly double at 39.49 seconds. The Swordfish hacker would never have made it on Android. I've done this test a few times and pretty much in the same range for times as what you're seeing here. From Frontend to first screen in a game, Linux was 8.68 seconds and Android was 3.93 seconds. I did this test many times. 8.68 was the fastest I could get Linux to boot into the game. More than double Android each time. From sleep back to game, Linux was 1.48 seconds and Android was 2.56 seconds. Is this a tie? I have no idea. Do you want your games to start faster or do you want the device to start faster? Personally, games, as they rarely ever shut down, but let's just say tie. Now the touchy subject, input lag. It's one of the most pronounced negatives for Android, and even after Taki's video on the subject, it's still talked about. So does it exist? If you want a full intensive test, check out Taki's video and I'll leave a link in the description. But for my homemade feeling tests, let's see. First, I wanted to test Linux with an Xbox controller over Bluetooth. And while it kept saying it was connected, the light on the controller never stopped flashing and nothing would work. I tried 3 different Xbox controllers, same thing, just couldn't get this to work. Since I was never able to get it working on the Linux side, let's see about the Android side with the same controller. And zero input lag. Nothing. Not even a smidge that I could see. But these results change a bit as we go further. You're going to have to trust me on this one, but next is Bluetooth audio lag on Linux. I'm using the Samsung Galaxy Buds Plus to test here, and the results from this one is pretty surprising. I was always told there is no audio delay when using Bluetooth headphones on the Linux side, but there absolutely is. Zero doubt. In fact, the delay between both operating systems is exactly the same in this regard. This leads me to believe it's more to do with the Bluetooth hardware than operating system differences. Or maybe other Bluetooth headphones have less latency on Linux and more on Android, if that's a thing. Now let's talk about actual input lag and audio delay between button press to action or sound. And on the Linux end, I don't see any lag to speak of, or that I can discern. On the Android side, I noticed something, and after changing a few settings, it disappeared. Namely using Vulkan and changing RetroArch's audio latency to 64 ms. After changing that, no perceivable lag that I can tell. Literally the exact same. Or that option was placebo and it was always good. I don't know. I don't work for NASA, but I feel like if I have to look this hard, it doesn't exist. Or it's a minuscule difference. I feel like when people talk about lag on Android, they likely mean this audio issue, as the actual inputs are not delayed that I found. It's misleading, the sound making it seem like it's delayed. I'm going to put this one as a tie with a slight edge to Linux, mostly because swapping back and forth between operating systems and testing is wearing on me. I feel like Jack Skellington doing tests screaming, "Interesting reaction, but what does it mean?" Turns out it means nothing. What about non-emulation games? Or maybe a better phrase is outside the normal. The Linux side has an application called PortMaster, which has a list of over 90 games that can be played on the device. There are actually quite a few games here that are better Linux side than the Android equivalents due to just being available easily and having some better settings. Stardew Valley, Shovel Knight, Undertale, etc. are some examples. In comparison, Android has the complete Play Store, and while it may not be a full one-to-one with PortMaster games, there's thousands more available. The one caveat, of course, is the lack of L2 and R2 working, which is a big one. I'd call this a win for Linux on the RG353V specifically, but for a device with working triggers, Android is way ahead. Now, let's take a look at updates. On the Linux side, ArcOS has a handy update option that'll update everything you need on the device without worry. Android side is a bit different. There's the Play Store updates, if you have that installed, as well as operating system updates via Anbernic, which involves flashing on the RG353V, but over the air on newer devices like the RG405M. Linux is the clear winner here for updates, even compared to over the air. Let's talk about other features. I've talked about this many times, but cloud saves is a huge one for me. With Android, I can have automatic cloud saves set up and synced across multiple devices in a few minutes. In fact, I have a video on it. This is technically possible with an rclone script on the Linux side, but the hassle involved with setting that up in comparison is not even close. Having an actual web browser on the Android side is a huge benefit as well, with the entire World Wide Web at your fingertips and ease to download or check anything you want to check on your device. No such luck on the Linux side. That's all I really have for this one. I tried my best to look at this from an objective lens and compare them both without bias, but that might be impossible from where I am. I did come away with a healthy respect for Linux here, especially in the PS1 and under category. I can see why people like it, and the ease of something like ArcOS, which just works. It definitely seems like it thrives in that environment. However, with Android emulation taking off and more devices being Android only, it only makes sense to stick with it. For me personally, I have a tough time putting away all the Android benefits for ease of use, especially when setup time of the device is a fraction of the lifetime in your hands. Put the work in initially, learn the ins and outs of what you're using, and off you go with no limits to what you can do with the operating system. And that's it for this one. As always, hope you liked the video and hope you all have a good one.